Hey everyone, and welcome back to the ScholarAI Founders Pod. Find us on all the usual podcast locations and check us out on YouTube at the ScholarAI YouTube channel. Be sure to leave your comments in the sections below, and we'll get to them in some following episodes. So, Shashi, Lakshay, how are things going? And we'll kind of jump into some topics here. But you all spent the weekend in Utah. So tell me a little bit about that. How was the trip?
It was great. Now I had a nice time out on the slopes. I was with this beginner skier, so it's really holding me back. But no, no, we had a we had a good
Uh,
time, and thankfully, my number one goal was to not call my brother-in-law, who's an orthopedic surgeon, with an injury report. So thankfully, after 40, that's my top priority. In previous years, I've just been the daredevil who'll go down the mountain as fast as possible. It's it's not who I am now, but no, we had a good time with some skiing and some snowmobiles.
yeah, it was obviously I guess like being from Oregon, like skiing is like one of the kind of go-to activities, but I never like did it enough to be good at it. It was always just kind of like once a season sort of thing. But this is the first time going up the mountain, actually like being able to like be very comfortable on like greens and going down no problem, which is pretty exciting. Like kind of to the point that like if friends wanted to plan a ski trip, I'd be very readily hop on rather than having to worry about like, oh guys, I'm sorry, I'm bad. Please slow down. The my last run though, I hopped on a lift thinking it was like super familiar. After Shashi had called it for a day, I was like, okay, I'll just do one last run, so no big deal. Hopped on. I was just chatting with the guys who are also on the lift, and they're like, yeah, I just completed my first week day. And they're like, oh, there's no greens on this route. You know that, right? I'm like, what? Right? You're just like being funny, no? We go up to the top and it's like zero visibility, only four blacks and one blue the whole way down. And I'm just like looking over this like precipice that starts this blue. I'm like, this is this is how I end. I sent a text to my friend saying if this is my last contact, play EDM at the memorial. And then took it like an hour and a half to get all the way to the bottom after many, many crashes and like snow in all of my hair and inside my helmet. But eventually did my first blue as well, I guess. So that was my weekend. But yeah, it was a pretty fun time and lots of good conversation about that too.
And
Yeah,
then
that
we
sounds great.
missed you. We of course set out to do this, all three of us, in unforeseen circumstances. But anyway, we you were missed on the trip.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would have liked to have been there. I will share a little bit of interesting. So like just pulling the viewers behind the wall a little bit. My father had some kind of emergent health complications over the weekend, so he was visiting us out here in North Carolina, and it's just an interesting observation because we spent some time in shout out to Duke University Hospital, both in the ED and in the inpatient floors, and they the learning I would pass on, just kind of the interesting anecdote is a lot of his blood tests originally came back um, unremarkable, meaning they kind of just were on standard baselines, not nothing really to kind of um, indicate any sort of disease or anything like that. And it actually took kind of physicians electing to kind of do more follow up tests, specifically a CT scan, before they actually ever got to the bottom of kind of what was going on with them. And so it's all likelihood, very likely that this thing had been going on for quite some time and just gone unnoticed because the kind of standard diagnostic workup just simply wasn't returning the necessary results. So it's just interesting, kind of viewing the healthcare system through that lens and just simply saying like sometimes I think we underappreciate the delta that can be created in like a top academic medical center in which physicians and nurses there are kind of taught to go the extra mile versus some of the care that might be available to people elsewhere. And obviously that extends globally as well. But anyway, just kind of wanted to pass that on as kind of an interesting anecdote for the last weekend. But cool. Okay. Well, hopping right into it, I'm seeing a few mentions of GPT-5 popping up, Twitter, X, LinkedIn, random speculation on that kind of thing. And rather than commenting directly on whether or not we think it's going to happen, I actually kind of want to look at it through the lens of new foundational models being introduced, whether that's evolutions of existing ones or other ones, and how that kind of ties in with the kind of ongoing debate that I see that is fine tuning or RAG. And so I'm going to set the stage with an opinion, but then I would love to get Lakshay's thoughts and then also Shashi, you following that, just kind of what you would think. But I think that as new foundational models kind of come out, obviously that comes with an update of knowledge cutoff. There's more information that's available to them, usually larger context windows, kind of more and more capabilities. As we see the speed of foundation models, the iterative approach kind of reducing, meaning new foundation models getting released more and more quickly. It feels to me like fine tuning may have less importance as we move forward, whereas RAG kind of feels like it's always going to have a place because not only do you need kind of immediate information recall from the newest and up to date sources, but you also kind of need to narrow the focus of the large language model over the documents and or knowledge that you kind of care about. So in that way, I think I'm kind of team RAG, if you will, but would love to hear kind of your all's thoughts on whether you see it. Is it an and conversation? Is it an or conversation? And if so, kind of which one? So Lakshay, you want to kick that off?
Yeah, I'm forgetting where I had this conversation kind of recently, but I'm kind of of the sentiment that like in general, RAG wins. I think like in the space of like knowledge work and information work, I think RAG is just kind of the default. I think especially the ability to kind of source where your information comes from in some spaces is almost like critical. Like you can't just trust knowing that these LMs come with the inherent assumption that this is being generated from some documentation. I think it's going to be very, very hard to assume high adoption in knowledge spaces if you assume you're only using a fine-tuned model just because you can't trace where that information is coming from. Whereas RAG, even if it's hallucinating, you can see what the basis for that hallucination was. That being said, though, like I think with fine tuning, there's a lot of stuff you can like capture with like style. There's stuff that you can capture with like tone. Obviously, we talk about a lot about like LMs and like language specifically, but when you imagine imagery, storyboarding, directors, like they're fine tuning on like, for example, if we want to say like a Wes Anderson style of film, it'd be a lot easier to make a new Wes Anderson film if we fine tune on all of his other ones, right? Um, so it's very much going to be a both, but I feel like the importance of fine tuning will be that presence of both will be a lot more prominent in very specific spaces. Whereas RAG, I feel will get you most of the way.
Well, actually, a question for you about this. Do you think, in the context of GPT-5, larger context windows, and the opportunity for maybe more significant prompting and prompt engineering, loading, for example, identity into a prompt or context into a prompt with a GPT-5, for example,
Mhm.
could you avoid fine tuning or replicate the capabilities of fine tuning without bothering to fine tune the model if you had a better foundational model and room for lots and lots of background context?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like having only played with like a certain size of context window, like the sort of scale of context window that have been discussed is like way out of the scale of anything I've personally played with. I think when I kind of think about that, the thing that comes to mind is that even with these large context windows while we've had are like relatively large for the last couple of months, like we're talking like GPT-4, the 1.128K, whatever, it's still pretty easy for details to get lost. And there's like, it's almost like a compression problem where like you can have a really large context window and technically everything's accessible. But even within that space, there is almost this kind of like RAG-esque paradigm that drives what's being discussed. And I think it's like, it's in the kind of space of optimization where like, if we were to look at like a traditional computer, right, you can keep on adding more memory and more RAM, but still fundamentally like what is inside that RAM still matters a lot, right? You can't bloat it with a bunch of stuff. Otherwise that messes up how fast it runs, that sort of thing. So I think you can probably reduce a lot of the need. Again, assuming a very general model that, let's say we're going to bring the Wes Anderson example again. This model has seen all of these movies. It's seen Wes Anderson. It's seen George Miller. It's seen everybody, right? And so somewhere in its design, it recognizes Wes Anderson generally looks like this. I think that would work to a certain extent. And that'd probably get you pretty far if we assume like a really, really large training set. But again, you kind of still risk like losing details, whereas a fine-tuned model is like designed to be laser focused on this one case. So the risk of it messing up or losing or compressing the wrong details is a lot less likely.
Makes sense. Could you replicate, if you wanted to avoid fine tuning altogether, could you have a RAG implementation? Let's take the film component out because film, in terms of context size, is so big. But if it was, let's say documents, let's say a legal firm has 5 gigabytes of legal documents, which may feel like a lot to them, but really in the context is not that big and could be put into some kind of implementation. If you have a lot of legal documents, do you need to fine tune to get the style right, or could you avoid fine tuning if you have a really big context window where you could load, let's say, all of those documents into the context and then ask for another document in that style?
My intuition check there would be like the RAG effectively becomes your prompting. And that like if you were to ask for like, hey, I want a patent application document, what you would do is you would retrieve the best example like template you have, grab that and put it like immediately into context. So, like the moment you ask something, it's right there and present in the most recent kind of memory. And once you've done that, you say, use this as a template shape. I would be concerned if we were to even if we were to assume like a million bytes of context, like some massive context window. Even if you were to have every single document in there, you would risk mixing details because the prompting is just like not good enough to direct to say, hey, I have like 5 gigs of documents kind of available for you to look at. It's on you to figure out which ones to pick out and which details to try and replicate. I just historically, like with these models, I haven't found that you can get prompting that specific, and it's kind of almost better to do that algorithmically, aka by RAD.
Yeah, it feels to me like independent almost of the context window size, you still have to focus the attention, so to speak, of the large language model in a series of tasks, which is why I do think that RAG or some, derivative thereof feels more evergreen to me than the fine tuning of models. Like assuming that we still get to an AGI, you still need some sort of, like you're saying, hierarchical or algorithmic workflow such that they can achieve the objectives of a given task that demands kind of commanding the large language model's attention down specific routes and away from other routes. It just feels like RAG is kind of the kind of preeminent way to do that right now. So that was great. That was very interesting. Thanks, Lakshay, for sharing your perspective there. I kind of want to pivot slightly to a different kind of a more business oriented conversation around like large language models, AI in general. I saw a report today, truth of which will kind of be determined, but that Perplexity, which is kind of, by all accounts, the Google competitor in the AI space, is going to start selling ads. And we kind of talked about this. I think that, in some ways, like there just isn't a way around providing a software service to users that isn't ads based in order to get to kind of the overall, business model that a lot of these companies are going after. Shashi, I'm wondering if you wanted to share some thoughts on what you think this says about the market at large, or about what Perplexity specifically, or kind of any of the above.
Yeah, Damon, I'll just echo something that you said very wisely, which is a large scale B2C enterprise like Perplexity inevitably ends up in an advertising business. I think it's unavoidable to go there because you're not going to get people to generally switch from a free Google to a monthly subscription search engine. It's just unlikely to work. Your audience will be very niche, and that's not their aspiration. They're trying to build a general purpose search tool on RAG. So yes, advertising is the natural outcome. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this was always the plan. And in their fundraising documents, they must have discussed their monetization strategy. And I imagine this was the first and primary monetization that they imagined doing advertising a la Google.
Do you think that walking down that path, I find it at least somewhat at odds with what AI is designed to do, right? AI is kind of designed, at least in the way that we think about AI search, it's designed to separate signal from noise. It's designed to return results, not a list of like indexable, pages, which is what drives the ad revenue. So I just don't see a ton of synergy around giving people a purely AI driven or AI generated response and also selling ads, unless again, it's like kind of like we talked about before, where it's almost this picture in picture, side panel of ads, maybe as, preference of, resources that are included in the results, for example. But in that mind, I just have a hard time kind of finding any sort of cohesion between the most accurate results and a pay to play system. And so in some ways, I feel like those are somewhat incongruous.
The providing a list of links will create a click-through rate that is higher than providing answers first and then a list of supplementary links. That's what you're saying, and I agree with you. And I think that's right. I think that poses a challenge fundamentally for Google Ads, which has been accustomed to being relatively light on the answer. They do more of that now than they used to, providing the answers at the top of the screen first and then providing the list of links. But primarily the user behavior on Google is to search, click a link, and then proceed down your train of progress. Whereas ChatGPT has set our expectations that AI systems will provide the answer and then occasionally provide links like Perplexity does or like ScholarAI does. I think the use case we're going down to now is a hybrid where the search engines, Google has drifted in this direction, provide the answer at the top, and then provide the links. Perplexity is even further down that progression on that spectrum of provide a much more lengthy answer first and then provide further reference material. I think the latter is the direction that the market will go in generally, and the quality of those links and the quality of the text at the top will determine who wins. The determinant of winning in any market ultimately is quality to the end user. And I see where Perplexity is going as really interesting and giving them a real shot against Google. I think Google realizes that as well and will have to evolve their behavior. If they don't evolve, Google will continue to own the laggards of the market. They will own some meaningful percent of the market, 20, 30, 40%. They won't own 90% like they've been accustomed to. So that's the decision for Google is do they change their behavior, which results in a lower click-through rate, lower ad generation revenue, but more market share, or will they modify their search results page to have more market share, but thus less click-through rate?
Alex, any thoughts with regards to Perplexity or kind of an ads-based AI, business model?
Yeah, we've talked about. I mean, I think when we first brought this up about Perplexity ads, how that works, it very much felt to me like it just kind of seems like inevitable that at some point you'd have them. I think the one thing that on seeing this news and as you guys were telling, I was just looking at Perplexity's site, seeing how their current pricing structure works. I think this is kind of just an existing problem for all AI startups to solve about how to get profitable when a lot of the consumer pattern assumes you subscribe, you get unlimited use. It's not usage based. It's not server based. You have to assume that you are paying for tokens every time someone sends a question. And because it's such a variable cost, there is not a good existing consumer pricing model that gets people subscribed to that pattern. Right now, their plans are $20 a month, $200 a year. And it's unlimited in every other capacity, right? Because that's what consumers have come to expect. You don't expect to have paywalls or limits when you start paying for a subscription fee, especially one that's double digits. I don't know. I would wonder, and obviously this is not going to be information that's public, but I wonder what numbers they were able to achieve on that model and how much of that drove the choice that ads is a better revenue stream than assuming consumer subscriptions. It's just interesting. It's a problem for every AI startup. I don't think anyone's really had a good answer to it yet. But it's an interesting one nonetheless. And this kind of feels like the first dance of a big startup actually changing something or doing something a little bit unexpected for the startup space in that way.
I think that's right. I mean, I think we'll continue to see shifts as we head down this path. But yeah, so it's kind of put a pin in that. We'll kind of revisit that as there's certainly going to be progress there. But Shashi, you kind of mentioned another thing in the post talking about Trump's SPAC and kind of the increase in value that kind of going public given him. You want to take that?
Yeah. So Trump Media has the SPAC has gone public. It's generated a valuation around $8 billion, and that results in a $6 billion windfall essentially to him personally. It's based on this social media company that is not profitable, that no one I know uses. So I think this is really meme stock territory. People are buying the stock as a way to express their preference for Trump and what they perceive to be his villainization by traditional media. And so what's the net here? Trump's got a $6 billion on paper stake that will help him in a variety of things, whether that's legal or campaign. I find it interesting how the market is leading to financial outcomes that will certainly play in politics, but also kind of resurfaces the Robinhood style and GameStop style behavior of voting to support things that you believe in, even if they're out of favor in some other traditional sense.
In some ways, I'm curious as to, there's been some unlocks kind of like you mentioned, sparked kind of by Robinhood that I think has driven some of this overtly speculative behavior in the public markets, specifically no fee trading, right? You can trade in and out of a stock without actually having to kind of provide any capital. Historically, even as recently as roughly 10 years ago, there was a fee every time you bought or trade, sold a stock, meaning that you had to kind of have increased conviction around that. You simply couldn't profit from a relatively small gain in the stock. And so I do wonder how much has been driven by that. Obviously, with the kind of speculative nature that is cryptocurrency, I see some parallels here. Leading that, I think there's an interesting discussion to be had around, in many ways, we're seeing an emergence of new companies and new brands built on top of kind of personal personas. And what I mean by that is, like, we see Skims, right, which is a product of kind of Kim Kardashian's fame turned into material goods that are sold. We've seen similar. Gwyneth Paltrow has an entire kind of portfolio of goods under their, I think it's Goop, GOOP. And there are others, right? Aviation Gin from Ryan Reynolds is another example, and then kind of this DTJ, if you will, on this True Social platform being kind of the latest example with Trump. I think it's kind of fascinating to see almost building a brand in the social media economy and then kind of parlaying that into real world or physical goods. I guess, a social media company in and of itself with Trump's example. But otherwise, I think it's just, I don't really have a very strong opinion about it. I'm not really delivering a thesis here. I'm just simply stating it as an interesting observation that we're seeing what I guess, saying it in a slightly different way. I wonder what if we are seeing is a migration into the way that new brands will be built in the future, right? Another example would be Mr. Beast, in that you collect the audience first, you entertain them through social media or otherwise, and then you kind of parlay that audience into some other more traditional form of business, whether that be D2C chocolate sales or a new social media or otherwise. So there's a lot of thoughts, but just kind of curious how you all are responding to that, maybe.
Yeah, I think I think the movie star to like alcohol brand owner, like Mint Mobile, whatever, like I've always found that really interesting. I kind of look at it as like not symptomatic makes it sound like it's necessarily a bad thing, but just like it's an extension almost of like just like kind of the content creator economy where like what people like to invest in and buy into these days is not like brands. Like it's not like I'm also a big fan of like I don't know, like Gogurt came to mind, but I'm a fan of the people and its associations with those people that suddenly incentivizes me to follow a certain brand. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's just really interesting to see how like commonplace that's becoming. Like if you look at like any actor, odds are they have like a pretty significant like investment or stake portfolio in something. And it just seems like a very prominent way for like people who are who already have celebrity status to kind of walk away with like a very, very major brand deal, even if the product is not something that has any like legs on its own. Um, the Mint Mobile thing by Ryan Reynolds continues to surprise me every time I like look at like the details of what happened there. It's just crazy to me that like this guy who plays the same character in every single movie for like the last 10 years is making movements with like telecommunications businesses.
Yeah, I think the lesson is that in a commodified space where you can create a small degree of difference in quality or access, that personalities and brands, individual brands, can create massive behavioral change because it's a commodity. It's not that different whether you use Mint Mobile or Verizon or AT&T. What you're getting isn't really that different. So the cost of switching, there isn't that much risk of loss. Whereas the association and the value creation to you personally of having that relationship association, just to add some examples, Logan Paul's got Prime drinks. The kids, in middle school at least, that I have visibility into, all want to buy Prime as their drink of choice rather than Gatorade. It gives them a feeling of being cool and interesting and associated with Logan Paul in some way, and what he stands for, competitiveness and the like. And my kids only want to buy Feastables chocolate. They don't want to buy any other chocolate. And it's because they feel like they build some kind of personal relationship with Jimmy Donaldson. And so that's powerful. And I'll just add one more kind of personal brand power reference, which is Taylor Swift. That's just been an incredible movement to see how much financial activity she's been able to generate from her brand, whether that's in-person concerts or going to the movies or other experiences. So ultimately, we care deeply about our relationships. We're social creatures. We're mammals. So worth remembering, particularly as builders in the AI space, that everything about AI has been built by mammals for mammals. And so there's a very human, on the ground, standing on earth reference point there to just kind of remember as we go through these layers of abstraction into the proverbial clouds.
We should put AI for mammals as our website slogan.
That's funny. No, yeah, just kind of adding on to what you were saying, Josh, and Lusha, I think there's just the thing that I think about if you look back through history, it does feel like it's always been the case that people have gravitated to people and not brands. Like famously, right, Nike kind of ballooned with the introduction of their sponsorship of Michael Jordan, and kind of in many ways, like their celebration of athletes and of people have kind of catalyzed their growth throughout. We're just seeing a new paradigm now, rather than instead of a single brand paying a celebrity or a spokesperson directly, that spokesperson is kind of instead owning the brand themselves. And so there's, I'm sure there are unintended consequences of that, but in any event, it does feel like that's exactly what's kind of happened here with through social and the kind of the speculative nature of that, right? This is just in the same ways that your children are voting with, albeit not their dollars, I suppose, their chocolate choice and their choice of drink. People are voting with their dollars in the stock market. And I do think that some of them are eyes wide open to saying, based purely on business fundamentals, this valuation makes no sense, but we don't care. We're happy to lose the money we're putting in here to kind of vote for our, political candidate of choice, or to defend this person against some perceived wrongdoing or otherwise. And I'm not necessarily commenting whether that's just good, bad, or indifferent. Just again, simply observation there.
As a company builder, Damon, I'm curious. If you knew a celebrity was going to give you a 10% lift in company value, wouldn't it make sense, or more than a 10% lift? Wouldn't it make sense to just give them a 10% equity stake in your company, knowing they're going to drive massive audience? Like if you could get Taylor Swift to be ambassador for this company or any other company, wouldn't you throw a free equity stake at that person for that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. Yes, right. I mean, like you're saying, especially if you're playing in the commodities space, I mean, I do think that the way that you can differentiate is by having a brand that people relate with. And there is kind of, again, the tried and true strategy for executing on that is having the people inside of the brand as spokespeople that people relate with. And so, yeah, I mean, I think in short, yes. And from the creators or the spokesperson's perspective, I completely understand and sympathize with why they no longer want to sign up for that relationship, right? They want to own the lion's share of the kind of financial upside that comes with building the brands. Yeah, I think I think both people kind of want the same thing here. It's just a function of how they ultimately get there. Great. Okay. Moving on from that, I just want to reflect here as we're coming to the end of March and in beginning of April here. All of us having been from being at currently, in my case, Duke. It was kind of an interesting run. Also just reflecting on, also just reflecting on kind of NC State's unlikely kind of, surge here into the Final Four. I'm just curious. I think of the three of us, I probably watched the most basketball, so I've been tuned in pretty closely to Duke games and kind of the kind of broader March Madness. But Josh, you have any thoughts on Duke's kind of defeat in the Elite Eight?
Well, at first, NC State's been a revelation and probably turned their season around at some point there toward the end to be on this incredible run that they're on. And I don't begrudge NC State anything. I think it's a great story, and I'm cheering for them. Really, I have no animosity toward NC State as a university or basketball team. This wasn't Duke's best team, and what you're seeing in the basketball space is that seniors, the bigger bodies, more mature bodies, are doing better. Eddie or Edie, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, on Purdue, big man. I think he's a senior and playing incredibly well. UConn's got some juniors and seniors who are playing great. And NC State has two seniors. I don't know if they're transfers in or not from the portal, but anyway, older players, more mature physically and playing great. And this has been Duke's problem, is that they've had great talent that are 18, sometimes 19 years old. But when they go up against 22, 23-year-olds who have just been in the gym longer, they just can't hold up. Last year's loss to Tennessee, and then again this year's loss to NC State, I think are are kind of proof that it matters in college basketball to have older guys, even if they weren't the top 5 players in the country in their recruiting class. If you can get them to stay till they're seniors, you have a better chance of a championship.
What's say? Anything to add there?
I'm not super informed on basketball. I built my bracket based on colors. I from the little bit of Duke I have seen this season, I basically only watched both of the UNC games, and both times I was just like head in hands, just like what is going on? I was telling Shanti this. There's a moment in the game where like we were like about to shoot, we lose a rebound, and they just like UNC grabs the ball and throws it across the corner. The guy just runs and dunks. Like I got up and said, "Are y'all stupid?" And so I had them losing to Houston on my bracket. Not even because of colors. I just like low faith this season. Normally, I at least get them to like top 2 or like last 4 or something. But yeah. Good job, team. We'll get them next year. Oh, we
That's awesome. That's hilarious.
And to be fair to Houston, if Houston had Jamal Shad, they would have won that game. I mean, I feel pretty confident that we wouldn't have beaten Houston if it were not for that injury. So, yeah, well done.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably the case. And I think you're exactly right, Josh. Like having watched college basketball for many years now, we kind of saw 3 different eras, right? There was the kind of original era where it was people stayed 3 to 4 years. So you got seniors on all the teams. You tried to collect the best talent, but then the talent was kind of more evenly spread because people just kind of understood that if they entered a university, they would be playing behind the people that were there for a couple of years. And so they might make a different selection based on that knowledge. Then we had kind of the era of the one and done, specifically with Duke, Kentucky. There's been other examples in which kind of you did get this more revolving door of high talent, usually number 1, number 2 best recruiting classes in the country. They come in, they stick around for a year, maybe 2 years at most, and they leave to the professional ranks. I do wonder if we're going to see a new transition. We've already started to see it a little bit, but then the NIL of it all will maybe incentivize players who would have previously gone earlier to the draft to kind of start their clock, make more money, get that second contract a little bit earlier to stay in school longer because they are making real money. We're talking millions of dollars per year here in the college ranks, and so I do wonder if you're going to start to see a few of these people who may not be lottery picks, but maybe late first round, second round draft picks sticking around in college longer. And with that, what we've already seen is an over kind of indexing from the best teams, best meaning people who are going the furthest in the NCAA tournament on the transfer portal. So they're bringing in people who have matured for a year or 2, maybe were under recruited coming out of high school, but have proven either through their development progression or just because someone kind of, under evaluated them when they were younger, that they're incredibly valuable. And yeah, you're correct. I think I saw a thing where 4 out of 5 of NC State starters are transfers, meaning they started their college career somewhere besides NC State. And it's like that at a lot of different places. UConn, even, who is the best team in the country or has been all year, also plays some transfer players. UNC, as Lakshay was describing, full of transfer players. Armando Bacot is a 4-year starter or a 4-year player at UNC, but a few of the other handful of starters and bench players, key performers they have came from other universities. So anyway, interesting progression. It felt apropos to talk about Duke given the kind of recent exit and the March coming to an end. But it is interesting. So that's kind of all I've got for today. Anyone else have any closing thoughts before we wrap?
Would you spend $100,000 for a photo with 3 presidents, Dane?
I would not. I understand the need for fundraising. I'm not a big memorabilia person. So as an example, kind of name dropping here, my wife and I recently met Austin Rivers because he was in town for the Duke UNC game, and we were at an event that he was a speaker at. So we went up and had a great conversation with him for probably all of 30 seconds to a minute, so nothing substantial. But even the idea of asking somebody like that in a scenario for like a selfie or a signed autograph of some kind is never something that has really appealed to me that much. I'm not necessarily much of a collector, so having pictures with famous politicians or athletes or otherwise is not something that attracts me. That said, the whole kind of auction format of I'm going to donate to this person's campaign regardless, so let me go and make an event out of this and hopefully do some good for other people. That would be more in line with things I would be interested in.
Okay, $100,000.
No, I don't know. I don't know how liquid y'all are, but I surely am not. So I don't think in any conditions, I don't know who would even be offered on the table to go meet. There's no way I'm saying yes to that in my current state of affairs.
Well, let me throw another offer at you then. What if I took 30 or 50 of those photos with 3 presidents, trained a machine learning model on it with those, and then pictures of you, and then offered it to you for $1,000? Would you take that?
I could probably Python script it with Dolly. I'll do it myself.
Like, I don't need you. I'll do that myself. Yeah. I mean, there's a market there, right? This is the brave new world we're walking into with AI. Is you can take those, and I mean, those presidents are never going to remember you, right? Like they interacted with you for all of 10 seconds in a line, and you marched in and out of the photo booth. Great, but you could have probably just as cool of a outcome from a much lower cost ML model.
It's fascinating. Maybe teeing up a longer discussion for next week. But my immediate reaction to you saying that, Josh, is that there's no way there'd ever be a market for that, because it's kind of the experience that drives that, memorabilia having, some sort of intrinsic value or something. But the counter to that argument is fake Rolexes, right? And people wear them as status symbols or otherwise. And so I think that in many ways, like, it'd be fascinating to kind of dive into the details of like what exactly in that scenario is the value derived from. Is it the experience itself? Is it the fact that you've got that on the wall? Kind of where does that come from? So anyway, setting the stage for next week. So thank you all for joining us this week on the ScholarAI Founders Pod. Catch us at all the same places next week, and be sure to check us out on YouTube at the ScholarAI YouTube channel. Thanks, and see you all next week.
Go Duke.